a group who feels their question is a burning question to start, and then we'll have up to 8 questions. Great. I'm going to let you two turn back a little bit so we can all see you. All. This is what? It's the people in the back that I'm having to like move up. I'm going to encourage you guys to move up just because it's all going to happen on that end of the room. I know, I'm pushing you back and forth, but I won't make you move again. That's right. I'm going to encourage you guys to move up because it's on that end of the room where we're going to do the questions. Okay. I'm going to encourage you guys to move up. We actually got our job accomplished. Okay, good. I'm going to encourage you guys to move up because that end of the room is where we're going to have the Q&A. You can, you don't, yeah. There's room. There's plenty of room.
I get back in that, boy, the heat's still flying in this one. Where do you want us to sit?
There are 8 pews in the front.
No, we're not sitting here. Screw.
Right to the front. Yep. There are 8 pews there, so. Yeah. Right by the door.
Say it again.
Okay. Okay, so we are going to take these 8 questions and then we will all go on our way because many of us have a celebration to get to tonight. So, and yes, at the end, after this session, anyone that wants to hear the organ can wander to the back and we'll turn it on and we'll let you play. So, which group would like to go first? Does anybody? Okay, awesome. That's great. So each group has the opportunity to pose a question to our group. And I'm going to ask that you use the microphone so that the people who are online hear the questions.
Very good. Thank you. Number 8 wonders, what is the common thread among people of various religious traditions that can lead to religious freedom?
What is the common thread between people of various religious traditions? What do all these religions have in common that could lead to religious freedom?
So I will invite our other panelists to opine, but my instinct will be love of neighbor, or the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's pretty established in Hinduism, Buddhism, certainly in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So that's a fundamental insight, because in the end, what do you wish for the other that you would want for yourself? The freedom to believe, and not simply to believe, because that can be an act of the self without expression, without practices. You want to be free to both believe and practice your ultimate convictions. But I'll invite others to opine.
I would certainly agree that is a good starting place. I think maybe just the idea of humility, that we all, there's the example that is often given of everybody has a hand on the same elephant. You might be touching the trunk, you might be touching the legs, you might be touching the tail, and you have a very different conception of which part of the elephant you're touching. But if you have the humility to realize that other people's experiences are different, then that can be a bridge towards religious freedom.
Exactly. I think also not just wishing the good of the other, which is fundamentally important, but also believing that the other's intentions are also good first, because that's a different thing entirely. It would be possible to believe that the kindest thing I could do for another is to make them more like me.
Okay, which number group is this? 8. Were you just 8? Every group gets one burning question. What group were you? And you're a 5? Yes. Okay, that's great. That's okay. I was just going to hold my boundaries, but I'm glad you're 5.
Thank you. Learned people. And our group, whatever our number was, we had a common shared experience of being surprised at hearing of the Anglican understanding of supporting the king versus the Baptist in supporting the kingdom, and having been able to approach life in a way that the Baptists wanting to have freedom of religion away from the state, and the Anglicans having enjoyed the being of the state. And it seems to us it's so reversed today. You spoke of that reversal. What do you think that our forefathers who were creating this understanding of separation of church and state would think about how we've changed today?
Again, I think Leland would be horrified by what Baptists have become in some ways, how much we've removed ourselves from our foundational points of religious liberty. So that's why I think churches like Culpeper Baptist, who have a unique tie to that story, need to keep saying it. And I think we do a lot of great work at Culpeper Baptist. I'm proud of the work we do in our community, blah, 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 blah. But religious liberty is the value our church brings to this world. And so we just keep talking about it and keep hoping that our historic story will ultimately win out. But and Leland saw this. I think I said this earlier. Leland saw this happening even in his lifetime, that we were getting power. We were getting power and we liked it. We liked the influence, and we started acting like the established church. Leland saw it in his lifetime and spoke, against that then. So I'm hoping we'll become more Baptist in the future.
I'm going to interrupt the speakers to say that you really have to get right on this microphone so that everybody has a really good ability to hear.
Do you want everything said to be repeated?
No, I think we got it, but
It was very good.
it was very good. And I got it recorded.
I don't think I have anything to add, really. I mean, I do think you're right that the truth about toleration of other traditions is easier to advocate for when you're powerless. Because then you want to be the one tolerated. The moment that reverses and you are the one with the power, then no way are we being tolerant because they're wrong and we can't allow their voices in the public square. And that's the sin. That's the temptation all the time.
I'll speak for James Madison as opposed to speaking for a particular denomination. I think James Madison in some ways would be pleased with where things are today, that certainly his belief all along was that the more you could separate church and state, the more it benefited both church and state. The less either one interfered with the other, the better off you are. And I think he would be pleased to see the amount of religious diversity in the United States today. I think he would want to see the government pulling back further from being involved with churches. I think he would have some compassion for the difficulties in separating church and state. And for example, he believed that it was not a good thing for the president to give calls for days of Thanksgiving or public statements of religion. And yet he did it a few times. He pondered on that in his later years and said, I really shouldn't have done that. So I think he would have some compassion for how difficult it can be.
To be painfully realistic about the origins of Lutheranism, the 250 years that came before the American Revolution, and the experience that Lutherans from Europe would have coming to the United States, it would have to be said that they would have a hard time imagining a world in which you could conceive of the people as a collective being the sovereign. That just wasn't in the vocabulary of the time. So it's hard to make them democratic when that was not on the menu in their lives. That being said, I think that the experience of Lutherans in the United States is the time when people with a theology that's not really equipped for that have to wrestle with it. And they do find a way, mostly by emphasizing that the principal motivation of interpersonal relationships in community is neighbor love.
Do we have a next group? And what number were you? 4.
We read a lot these days about the steep decline in mainline Protestant denominations, particularly PCUSA is on a multi-year steep decline. Other Protestant denominations certainly are as well. What would you say are the key reasons for this ongoing steep decline?
I don't have an opinion on that one.
So the data's complicated and treat most critiques of the data with some suspicion. So COVID's a huge complexity for the Episcopal Church. Our data actually shows that for the last 4 years we've been growing. We're still not back to our pre-COVID numbers. So people still use the narrative of decline because of that complication. The other thing which is also complicated is the Episcopal Church doesn't count everybody who goes to church. So for example, we've got 1,000 Episcopal schools in the country. My son went to one, St. Stephen's and St. Agnes. Every week they had to go to a corporate act of worship, but none of those kids get counted in the numbers because the view's taken that, well, they're made to go, so it doesn't count. I don't see why that matters at all. I think it's right and proper. He's made to go, and he should count. And after all, he is in the service. You know, so we also have a lot of retirement complexes, which we don't count. So, and then the other weird thing is we only count Sunday attendance. People are touching congregations midweek at a Bible study in all sorts of ways. So actually, the fastest declining tradition, ironically, I hate to say this to you, since 2016 are our Baptist friends. They're facing enormous decline. There's some evidence we've sort of stabilized, granted at a pretty low ebb, but we've stabilized nevertheless. The biggest decline for the Episcopal Church has been membership numbers, right? From the 1950s, we were 3 million members. Now we're about 1 million, just under 900,000. But actually, membership numbers are very, very weak because it's easy to end up being a member and not realize you are. So attendance numbers are a better indicator. So the picture's much more complicated. I think, why is religion and faith struggling? Well, secularization's a factor. You know, in the end, people prefer to do something else on Sundays. You know, it's more fun going to the movies or going out to friends or the golf course. So that's a factor. Another factor, I think, is skepticism. You know, that's certainly a coastal issue, East and West Coast, growing numbers of people not sure whether it's true. We're still stronger. Church is still stronger than Freemasons, for example. So all civic organizations are struggling. So what's actually happening is Americans have stopped joining things. We used to be really good at it, and we're not as good as we were. So those are the sorts of factors that complicate our worldview, but I think the whole picture is more and more hopeful, actually. I think, so this is the last thing I'll say. The Surgeon General under Biden issued that report on loneliness. 50% of Americans describe themselves as basically lonely and not having close friendships. Now, why? Well, it's devices, it's social media, it's the breakdown of family, it's divorces, it's grudges with siblings, it's not knowing your neighbor. You know, there are lots of reasons. I think the opportunity for church now is that if we can be the place where people reconnect with humans, then actually that can be one of our gifts we give this moment. And there are lots of signs that that's starting to happen.
Agree with everything he said. It's really hard to get attendance trends straight in churches. As a Baptist, what I think is positive about this, I don't want people coming to church because the cultural need to be accepted is bringing you to church. That's not what we want you at church. So what I think has happened is culturally, it's less advantageous to you to show up to church, and those people have stopped attending church. Good. We don't want you to come to church out of a cultural need. Birth rate and population growth matters. It's that simple. When I was in seminary 1,000 years ago, there was a very popular church book in my tribe, Why Conservative Churches Are Growing, right? And and that led in my tribe a very strong move to a conservative theology. They all happen to be in the South, right? The South of our country is a more conservative area. So as population grew in the South and population exploded in the South, out of the Northeast, those churches grew. The thing I say in denominational meetings that gets me uninvited to denominational meetings, some of this is maybe we're really bad at what we do. Maybe we're not effective as preachers, as pastors, as people that care and love our neighbors. Maybe it's us, and maybe it's not always the culture. And so I always want to make sure, as people of faith, we say, hey, is there something that we're not doing? And we'd much rather talk about the culture instead of where we're missing it.
And I'm not at all really disagreeing with Dan, but I want to throw out the opposite as a possibility. Maybe we have in some ways been working ourselves out of a job. We don't preach the fear of God. We don't want people to come to church because they're afraid of what will happen if they don't. In my tradition, at least, when I hear people say, why aren't there more people in our churches? Often what I think I'm really being asked is, why don't my children go? Why don't my grandchildren go? Because these are people who have gone all their lives and they love it, and it's important to them. It's a social connection, it's rich, and they learn. But the next generation has replaced that need with other things right under their noses. I mean, it isn't like they went away and lost their faith. They lost their faith at home. And then the next generation is raised without it at all. And I'm not trying to blame people for that. I think this is just a real social reality. I personally have some opinions on who's at fault. I think it's the damn TV. If we just uninvent one thing, it would be television. And I'm joking, of course, but there is a member of the family that never shuts up, and that's the television. If you could say everybody can only watch 2 hours a day, I think we'd all be a much more civilized place.
One of the next group, we've had 3, who's fabulous. And I'll just, because I've asked everybody, you were number 2.
Number 2 noticed or thought that in all the discussion this morning, we never heard the Catholic religion mentioned. And so just where does the power of the papacy fit into all of this?
Well, let me give you the Lutheran perspective. The Catholic Church is unspeakable. No, I'm just joking. I mean, we are so similar now in some ways that it seems strange in a group of 21st century Americans talking about Christianity that they would be omitted. Of course, up to the time of the Revolution, the church was so bitterly divided that you really couldn't talk across that boundary. I mean, even in our lifetimes, I know people not much older than I am whose families there's Catholic families disowned them for marrying a Lutheran, and vice versa, whose priests said, well, you're dead to us now. You've abandoned us for some other tribe. And we don't do that so much anymore. That really never happens, or very seldom happens. And I think it's, in a way, it is odd that we aren't talking about that, but in the context of the 18th century, the dividing lines were so sharp. I mean, you would be as shocked in many parts of Pennsylvania to have had a sudden appearance of a Catholic community as you would have to have had a Muslim one. So we're lucky we don't live there anymore.
Again, speaking on James Madison's part, in Madison's time, of course, there were very few Catholics around, so he didn't have much opportunity to interact with Catholics. Speaking from a previous museum background, when I worked in New Bern, North Carolina, we had the home of William Gaston, who was a politician from North Carolina who was Catholic. And at that time, there were still the religious tests in order to hold office. So depending on what state you lived in, you would have to agree that you believed in God, or that you believed in the truth of the Protestant religion, or various ways of formulating exactly what you had to believe. And William Gaston was Catholic, but he was also very well respected in the community. And eventually they just sort of let the religious test slide on him. So it was sort of like, well, he believes in the truths of the Protestant religion, plus a few other things, and we're not going to mention them. And I'll say, as the Catholic on this panel, it is interesting to me, growing up in New Jersey, my impression was that just about everybody I knew was either Catholic or Jewish. And it took me a long time to figure out that those are both minority groups in America.
I think where you ended is actually quite important, and that is there has been a history of Roman Catholic prejudice in the United States, and that's part of the story of this country. John Locke, who Guy included in his presentation, in his letter concerning toleration, says you can tolerate everybody except two groups, interestingly, and they were Roman Catholics and atheists. And you can't tolerate atheists because you can't trust their word, because they have no foundation for their promises, because they don't believe in God. And you can't tolerate Roman Catholics because they own an allegiance to a foreign prince, namely the Pope. And actually that prejudice, even under enlightened European-influenced advocates for pluralism and toleration, did linger and shaped and was a factor in the election of Kennedy and the way he had to resolutely make clear that he wouldn't take orders from Rome. So you're right to identify the gap. It's partly numerical, it's also partly prejudice.
Yeah, that was the only thing I was going to say, is the only thing I know about Catholics. When Kennedy ran for president, I do remember that he spoke to a group of Southern Baptists in Texas to assure the nation that he would not take direction from the Pope in Rome. And it's interesting that he would speak to Southern Baptists about that.
Our next group. And what number were you?
Still are. We still are number one. Yes. Earlier you spoke about how Madison would celebrate today's diversity, but today's diversity is much greater than the diversity that Madison faced, or that any of the colonials faced, anybody faced in the time period that we've been speaking about. So the diversity is religious, the diversity is ethnic. There are small communities and large communities, and it's extreme. And we wondered what the history could say. Is there a way to back to some sort of unity, or has there ever been unity? That's not a question, but please react and save me.
So let me just make sure I understand the question. There was much more of a consensus in the early days of the United States. We're now an extreme pluralism. Will we ever regain a sort of greater consensus? Is that where the question's coming from?
That's part of what the question is. I'm not saying that there was consensus ever, but I am saying that diversity is there's much more diversity today than Madison faced, or that the era that we've been talking about faced. If history can say something,
Yeah.
what does it say?
No, I think, so the achievement of Madison was in a season when, in the end, the disagreement was primarily amongst Christian groups. Granted, there are Native Americans, but, you know, primarily Christian groups. They established a principle that would extend to any belief or conviction that did not harm others. And that was an extraordinary, first time in the history of the world, just extraordinary, almost counterintuitive concept and idea. And you are right, the pluralism now is very, very broad. And the Supreme Court, to its credit, has on the whole safeguarded the rights and liberties of the spectrum. Are there dangers in it being too broad? I mean, that is a major conversation that we're having now, and that touches a whole host of things around immigration. But my sense is, in the colonial period, convictions were held with very deeply, and therefore coexisting with dissenters was actually as much an achievement as it is for me now to say, I walked past it, I was staying with my son and his wife in Salem, Massachusetts, and we were staying in a little motel, and every time I walked home from his home, I walked past the Satanist place of worship, which had recently been vandalized, and they put up big things. You know, it is a reminder that this principle that you allow people you fundamentally disagree with, that was hard then, and it remains hard now. And where the problem then perhaps was depth of individual convictions and therefore difficulty accommodating even small differences, the problem now is the breadth of convictions we're being invited to live with. So I think the question's a good one, and I think you're right to say that it's a question that America's facing in deep and serious ways.
From Madison's perspective, I would say this first in a political way, and then I'll apply it to religion. One of Madison's innovations when he was writing in the Federalist Papers was to talk about his theory of faction, that there are always going to be factions that believe different things, but as you have the different factions competing with each other, it somehow all works out because you don't have a permanent majority that is oppressing the minority. And that was a big theme in Madison's writings. And in his writings about religion, he applies some of the same idea, that if you have a multiplicity of sects, that is actually a safeguard against the tyranny of the majority.
It's much easier to be tolerant when you're not afraid of something. And the corollary to fear is often anger. So if you are able to step back and view the other dispassionately, it's much easier to put yourself in their shoes or imagine their point of view. And I think that that's one of the accomplishments of the revolutionary era, the time in which a concept of freedom and unity is being drafted for the new nation, that they actually were willing to take the risk of living together in ways that they had not imagined in the past. I don't like, as a historian, don't particularly like to play the game of asking what would somebody from the distant past feel about what is right now. They would have a very hard time imagining the diversity. It's like, well, we didn't mean you to be this diverse. We were just thinking about living with dissenters, and I do think we lose the ability to be tolerant when we begin to be afraid. And I think now today we live in a world where a great number of people have come to understand that power can come from making some people afraid of other people.
Okay. The next question. Okay, that's great.
We kind of answered our own question. I laughed. I told Dan, I said, I'm guilty of my Baptist upbringing. I tried to tone it down, but I had Kathy Clore in my group. And and so now I just want to share that I was raised Baptist. We were raised in Culpeper, where you had the Baptists, the Episcopalians, and the Catholics, and we were all friends, and we always had that edge. It was really interesting. There was always just a little bit of edge when we got to talking, or we never went to church together. And it was always, oh, you're Baptist, or oh, you're Episcopalian, or oh, the Catholics, don't date the Catholics. And of course I did. And it was always that going on. But as an adult, I have a husband that was a Baptist preacher for maybe 10 years and a chaplain in the Army Reserve. But since that time, I think we have been everything. We have hit every church there is. We have felt at home in every denomination. And now, lo and behold, I'm Lutheran. Where are you, Jim? Pastor Jim. And so I just want you to know that it's all about Jesus. And that's what we came up with. And then, and of course, I was with Kathy. So we had quite a discussion. And it all started off really with, what did our founders mean by the word religion? What did that mean to them?
Came to the conclusion that it probably meant established religions.
So that was the answer we came up with.
Yeah, again, I think Leland had I agree that we were mostly talking about Christian groups, but Leland specifically named atheists, Muslims. I mean, he had a broad view of religion, so I would be careful about understanding his commitment, the Baptist, and I think the freedom of conscience language fits better to me, the Baptist story, than a freedom of religion language.
One thing I do just want to affirm is where you also ended up, the importance of recognizing commonalities. And I think it is true that once you recognize that our central conviction is that God was disclosed in Christ, and it really is all about Jesus, that is a shared conviction that Christians share, which means that I can disagree with this gentleman about baptism, but we share so much that we recognize that's a difference, but we can live with that difference and also celebrate what we share in common. And that is the achievement of the ecumenical movement, that recognition that you can either spend all your time focusing on differences, or you can shift your vision and focus on what you share. And that was the gift of your presentation, is that you can think of America in terms of constant arguments between red and blue, or you can interrogate a little and you discover that red and blue share a great deal. And that is a gift of perspective that makes a huge difference to the way you relate to others.
In one of Madison's writings, he starts out by saying, religion or the duty we owe to our Creator. So I think that is an interesting way of phrasing it, because it does get to the idea that it encompasses more than Christian religions to Madison. And I had another thought and I lost it. It was wonderful. You would have been impressed.
Well, let me pick up on that then and add to it that and that's a very kind of clear Enlightenment understanding that religion is the duty owed to the Creator. That implies not just a set of convictions, but an action or a life or style or a pattern that follows out of those convictions. It's interesting to me how often in our modern culture, religion is kind of, when it's spoken of in the abstract like that, is often really meant negatively. That it is the thing you don't like. You're fine with spirituality and meaningfulness and connection, but religion goes too far. That's where we're drawing lines between one another and not being as tolerant anymore. Even to the point, I think, that when people talk about, losing their religion, being non-religious, they're not really saying very much about themselves, except that they don't like something that they see as narrow and strict and judgmental. So in some ways, the language has become a lot less useful. We need to really say what we're talking about. I don't know that many of us would start with religion as being what we're defending. We would say faith or purpose, a conviction of connectedness to the divine. And not just to spiritualize it. We all have theologies and commitments to that. We're a creedal church and all of that. But I think we would be careful not to make it about judgment or behavior And when we do, then we immediately conjure up the negative idea that goes along with it for many, many people.
I remembered my wonderful idea. When Madison was writing about how he regretted having made some of these religious statements as president, he said, and I'm totally paraphrasing here, but he said that George Washington had used very broad or neutral language. So in Washington's religious statements as president, he would talk about the creator or providence or nature's God, those broad terms. That Adams had started using more specifically Christian language. Thomas Jefferson didn't give those kind of discussions at all as president. But when Madison made those kinds of addresses, he deliberately went back to Washington's precedent of speaking in broad religious terms, and that he was criticized for it.
For them being too broad, or?
For not being Christian again, the way that John Adams had been.
I believe group 3 might.
I will speak on behalf of Group 3. We did not come up with a question, but in view of our conversation, and I think most of what we were debating or discussing has already been sort of shared here in some of the questions, but there was great concern in our group about what our members believed is a rise in intolerance. Different ideas of what intolerance looks like or who is the greatest perpetrator of intolerance. But I suppose in the end, what we were really looking for is to find out, is there hope? Because while at the end of the day, the red and the blue argument, we are all similar when we're talking in tables like this, but what we're hearing, the greatest narratives seem to be pulling us apart. Is there a future for us?
I hope so. In putting together this exhibit that we're working on at Montpelier, we want to make it an exhibit that doesn't tell people what to think, but gives them something to think about. And certainly one of the things we want them to think about is the importance of religious freedom and renewing our American commitment to religious freedom, and what is it that we personally can do to increase religious freedom. So I think as long as some of us are thinking along those lines, I think there are more of us out there that we can connect with. So I think there's hope.
That's such a wonderful, wonderful, unanswerable question. Of course there's hope. On the one level, we can't live without hope. We know that I mean, those of us who have a conception of God that is greater than we are and loving toward creation and humankind, know that at the end of the day, there is a hopeful answer. There is a dawn. There's a resurrection. All these things are true, or our entire existence is in vain. So there isn't anything that we can, as humans, mess up so badly that God can't redeem us through it. Now that's not to say we should go try. And the real challenge is trying to figure out how we live as responsibly as we can in the meanwhile. And I do feel like at the moment a lot of people are abdicating responsibility where they need to be taking it up consciously. That doesn't mean everyone needs to hit the barricades, but to think really consciously about your role in the world and how what you do actually does impact everyone else in some way. There's much we can't fix individually, but we can at least be aware of what's going on around us and not just pretend it isn't happening.
Undoubtedly there is hope. Actually, I think America has been through so much, and actually seasons of depolarization are not new, and we come out of it every time, often chastened, often learn, and sometimes it takes a horrendous, civil war, for example, to actually come out through the other side, but we do. I think it is true that intolerance is found on both left and right. And I think that we do need people in both centers of discourse that recommit to seeing commonalities, understanding, and conversation. And I think if we do those things, this too will be a season we can learn from. And America's greatest years are still ahead.
Yeah, I think the hope is in doing what, as people of faith, we should be doing, which is building relationships across the spectrum. And shame on me. 2 years ago, Culpeper Baptist, we celebrated our 250th anniversary. I invited a well-known Baptist who's an expert on religious liberty to come speak on at our church. He brought one of his good friends, a Muslim, with him. It was a great day. And I left the church that day and I said, you know who I don't know? Any of the Muslims that are at the mosque here in Culpeper. And so I made an effort that day to build a relationship with Imam Shams. You know what Imam Shams wanted to do with me? He wanted to have a relationship with me. But I had to move away from what Guy talked about of the fear that is driven by other people. So since I've had a relationship with Shams, I've had the joy of telling some of our folks, it's not being funded by Saudi Arabia, right? All the crazy things that we say. They're not here to take over anything. You know, I go to Friday prayers. If Shams is speaking about something in the Old Testament, there's not a whole lot he's going to say that I'm going to disagree with. I mean, he's telling a story that's a common story. There are some things. There are clear differences, but we have a relationship. And I think all of us, if we want to do something other than just give opinions on the intolerance of our day, walk across and get to know the story of somebody else. It doesn't mean the differences will go away, but it means we'll have a relationship that can hopefully be strong enough to handle the differences.
I am going to take the point of privilege to just wrap us up at the end of the day. As someone who has spent the last 2 years immersed in this idea that learning about our history can help us be more resilient in today and give us a path toward hope in the future, my experience of this particular year of 2026, especially because it's the 250th of this building as well as our country, has been one of asking this question deeply. And I have already said this in a sermon, so I hope he won't be upset that I'm saying this now. My husband and his brother, their father was stationed at Fort Meade in 1976, and the boys remember that they were going to go to the fireworks on the National Mall, and then my father-in-law decided not to go at the last minute because of the incredible crowds. And so this year, we spent a week together with Joel's brother and our sister-in-law, being on the National Mall, doing what the boys had said that they were going to do for years. And we saw the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July this year. And as we were walking and waiting to get into that, I learned something incredibly important that changed my whole perspective about the bicentennial and this year. And that is that the small community conversations that happened in 1976 that some people remember as being a time when people were pulled back together were not planned by any official organization. That in 1976, this country was at a low point as far as morale and agreement. We'd had a president resign before they could be impeached. We were still protesting and bringing soldiers home from Vietnam in terrible situations. You know, summer of love and lots of, cultural changes were happening. And it was Walter Cronkite that said, if we celebrate this bicentennial without having community conversations, we will miss the opportunity to understand who we are as Americans. And so it was all a grassroots effort to have small community local conversations. So I think that hope, and if you know anyone who is in the special forces in our military, they will say this often, hope is not a course of action. And it's not. But it is a weapon of resilience. And it is something that fuels those courses of action in our lives. So I'm going to end today's conversation, which has been an incredible, incredible gift to me. Thank you all, because I dreamed that getting your voices in one room would help piece together some pieces and create this conversation that would be multi-layered. Thank you. But I'm also going to end with a challenge to each of you, is that you have this conversation with someone in your life. Whether it's neighbors, whether it's friends, something that we talked about today. Just have the conversation. And if that happens and we spread that and that happens over and over and over, that's the action. Those are the seeds that will plant and will bear fruit moving forward. Thank you all, and please join me in thanking our speakers.